The highways that snake through New Hampshire carry more than just traffic. They carry the weight of human longing, the desperate search for meaning in times of profound loss. This is where our first story begins, in the shadow of grief and the flickering hope of new love. In his early 20s, our storyteller found himself adrift. He lived 30 minutes outside Manchester and had just broken up with his girlfriend of 2 years. The emotional fallout left him feeling lost in a world that suddenly seemed too big and too loud. Then tragedy struck. His grandfather, a decorated veteran who had always been more than just a grandfather to him, passed away unexpectedly. Grief settled over his family like a shroud, but for his grandmother, the sorrow was a searing wound. Despite the pain, she clung to her faith, finding solace in the belief that her husband was now with the Lord. Every Sunday, come rain or shine, she would attend liturgy, her only lifeline in a sea of despair. Her grandson, recognizing his grandmother's profound sadness and perhaps seeking solace for himself as well, began accompanying her to church. What started as an act of familial duty soon became a deeply personal journey. In the house of worship, amidst the familiar hymns and jeweled rituals, he found a semblance of peace that had been eluding him. It was here that he began to understand the magnetic pull of faith, the way it could sustain a person through life's most arduous moments. But fate, as it often does, had a cruel twist in store. One Sunday, as the young man walked hand in hand with his grandmother towards the church, a seemingly ordinary day, he would meet a woman who would change his life forever. The encounter was like a scene from a movie, a chance meeting orchestrated by something, perhaps by fate itself. Her name was Sarah, and she, too, had recently experienced a profound loss. Drawn together by their shared grief, they began seeing each other regularly, finding comfort in their shared sorrow. But as time went on, their bond deepened, evolving into something more profound, something that neither of them had expected. They fell in love, deeply and irrevocably. Yet their idyllic romance was destined to be tested, not by external forces, but by the very nature of their bond. A love born out of loss and intertwined with the shadows of their past. As their love story began to take shape, so did the chilling realization that their feelings for each other were inextricably linked to the pain of their past. It was a revelation that shook them to their core, forcing them to confront the darkness that had been simmering beneath the surface of their seemingly perfect love story. Their journey from the depths of despair to the heights of love had been nothing short of miraculous. But now, they were faced with a terrifying prospect. The possibility that their happiness was nothing but a mirage, a cruel trick of fate in an otherwise desolate landscape. It was on one seemingly ordinary Sunday that the impossible walked into his life. The final hymn of the service was fading into the church's vaulted ceiling, the congregation filtering out in their usual unhurried fashion. But this day was different. Amid the familiar faces, he saw a figure so strikingly out of place that she might have materialized from thin air. In that small town nestled amidst rolling hills, where the local church was more than just a place of worship. It was a community hub where 3 generations of families sat in the same pews their grandparents had occupied. The appearance of a complete stranger was nothing short of extraordinary, and she possessed the kind of beauty that stops conversations mid. Her dark, luxurious curls caught the afternoon light streaming through the stained glass windows, and her hazel eyes were so deep they seemed to hold secrets older than the church itself. There was something almost ethereal about her, as if she existed in a slightly different dimension than everyone else in that sacred space. The way she moved, the way she held herself, suggested someone who was accustomed to being noticed yet somehow remained detached from the attention she commanded. Drawn by a mixture of genuine attraction and burning curiosity, he approached her after the service concluded. The spark between them was immediate and undeniable. That rare, electric connection that poets have spent centuries trying to capture in verse. She introduced herself as Kaylee, and her voice carried a musical quality that seemed to resonate in frequencies beyond normal human hearing. There was a playful mystery to her, a carefully constructed wall of charm that invited questions while deflecting direct answers. When he asked about her family or her sudden appearance in their insular community, she would deflect with perfectly timed humor and coy suggestions that such information would require proper courtship. The banter was intoxicating, a verbal dance that left him feeling simultaneously satisfied and hungry for more. Eventually, she did reveal that her family had recently relocated to the area and that she attended college nearby. Reasonable enough to quiet his curiosity, at least temporarily. By the time their conversation ended, he had secured her phone number and was riding the intoxicating high that comes with unexpected romantic possibility. But even as he walked away, something in the back of his mind whispered that Kaylee was unlike anyone he had ever encountered, and perhaps unlike anyone who had ever existed at all. The days that followed their encounter, their connection deepened through the modern ritual of constant digital communication. Text messages flew between them with increasing frequency, each exchange revealing new layers while somehow deepening the mystery that surrounded her. When they graduated to social media, he found himself scrolling through her Instagram with the obsessive attention that only new infatuation can inspire. What he discovered there both intrigued and puzzled him. Her account was surprisingly sparse, with remarkably few followers for someone so captivating. In an age where digital popularity often equates to social currency, her relative anonymity felt refreshing, even protective. As their conversations grew more intimate, Kaylee began to peel back the carefully constructed layers of her persona, revealing fragments of a past that was far darker than her mysterious charm had initially suggested. The picture she painted was one of profound family stepfather whose alcoholism had transformed their home into a battlefield where violence simmered just beneath the surface of everyday life. Her mother, she revealed, bore the brunt of this man's rage, creating an atmosphere of perpetual fear and instability that had shaped Kaylee's entire adolescence. But it was when she spoke of her biological father that her voice took on a different quality entirely, a tremor that suggested horrors too deep to fully articulate. She would only say that he was substantially worse than the stepfather, speaking in fragments and half-sentences that painted a picture of abuse so severe that her family had to uproot their entire existence. They had fled across state lines like refugees from their own lives, abandoning everything familiar in pursuit of safety. She had transferred schools, severed all ties with her past, and essentially erased her former self from existence, a level of desperation that spoke too dangerous, too terrible to name. Despite his growing feelings for her, he respected the boundaries she had drawn around these painful memories. There was something about the way she shared these details, calculated yet vulnerable, intimate yet distant, that made him feel both honored by her trust and deeply unsettled by the shadows that seemed to follow her wherever she went. The contrast between her radiant presence in church and the darkness of her revelations created a cognitive dissonance that he could unquite shake, but love, as it often does, made him push those concerns into the corners of his consciousness. As the old hymn spoke of love conquering all, he knew he had fallen. But how could he possibly express the turmoil of emotions he was experiencing? How could mere words convey the depth of feeling that had taken root in his soul? His gaze met hers across the worn pew, and in that silent communion, he found his answer. Love, he realized, doesn't always need words. Sometimes it can be found in the shared glance, in the unspoken understanding that transcends the spoken word. The following Sunday arrived with the weight of anticipation hanging heavy in the sanctuary air. He found himself scanning the congregation with barely concealed anxiety, searching for that familiar silhouette among the faithful. When Kaylee appeared, settling into a pew with the same ethereal grace that had first captured his attention, relief flooded through him like a benediction. Her presence felt like a sign from the universe itself, a cosmic approval of their budding connection. As the service concluded, and the congregation began their familiar ritual of fellowship and departure, he approached her with newfound confidence. The week of digital courtship had emboldened him, and when he suggested they go on a proper date, her response was immediate and radiant. She smiled with genuine warmth and accepted without hesitation, her enthusiasm matching his own. They agreed to meet later that week for what would be their first real evening together, away from the protective walls of the church and the watchful eyes of the congregation. The days leading up to their date passed in a haze of nervous excitement and careful planning. He found himself replaying their conversations, analyzing every word and gesture for hidden meanings, constructing elaborate fantasies about their future together. There was something intoxicating about the unknown quantity. She represented a beautiful enigma that promised to unlock mysteries he had even known he was desperate to solve. When the appointed evening finally arrived, they chose the safe territory of traditional courtship, a movie, followed by dinner, nothing too ambitious or presumptuous. It was the kind of simple, honest date that allows two people to exist in each other's presence without the pressure of grand gestures or elaborate performances. Throughout the evening, she proved herself to be an exceptional listener, asking thoughtful questions and responding with genuine interest that felt like a rare gift in an age of digital distraction and surface-level connections. As dinner wound down and the evening threatened to end, he found himself reluctant to let go of this perfect bubble they had created together. The night had exceeded his expectations in every way, and the thought of returning to the mundane reality of separate lives felt almost unbearable. They ventured onto one of those deceptive New Hampshire highways that masquerade as simple country roads, technically classified as a highway, yet it felt more like an intimate passage through nature's cathedral. The asphalt ribbon wound through dense forests, where ancient trees formed a canopy, so thick it seemed to swallow the last remnants of daylight. On either side, the wilderness pressed close, creating a tunnel of green that felt both protective and ominous, like driving through the throat of some sleeping giant. The evening air was crisp and filled with a scent of pine and possibility. Their conversation flowed as smoothly as the curves in the road, punctuated by comfortable silences and shared laughter that seemed to fill every corner of the car's interior. Everything about the moment felt perfect. The gentle hum of the engine, the soft glow of the dashboard lights, the way her presence seemed to make even the mundane act of driving feel like an adventure. It was one of those rare instances when life aligns exactly as you hope it will, when reality briefly matches the idealized version that exists in your imagination. But perfection, particularly the kind that feels too good to be true, has a way of revealing its fragility at the most unexpected moments. The universe operates on a cruel principle of balance, and for every moment of pure joy, it seems to demand an equal measure of terror in return. What was about to unfold would shatter not only the romantic illusion of their evening, but his fundamental understanding of what was possible in the world he thought he knew. In an instant, literally, between one heartbeat and the next, everything changed. Without warning, without any indication of distress or discomfort, Kaylee began to speak. But the words that poured from her lips were not English, nor any language he had ever heard before. The sounds were rapid and guttural, like an ancient incantation being recited at supernatural speed. The syllables seemed to tumble over each other in a linguistic avalanche that defied comprehension, as if she were channeling something far older and more primal than human speech. At first, his rational mind desperately searched for logical explanations. Perhaps she was having some kind of medical episode. Or maybe this was some elaborate joke. Some prank she'd concocted to play on him. But then he made the mistake of looking directly at her. And what he saw there destroyed every comforting delusion his mind had constructed. Her eyes had rolled back so completely that only the whites remained visible. Twin orbs of alabaster that seemed to glow with their own inner light in the dashboard dim illumination. The transformation was so complete, so fundamentally wrong, that his body reacted before his mind could process what was happening. The steering wheel jerked violently in his hands as pure terror flooded his nervous system. The car lurched toward the guardrail with deadly momentum, metal shrieking against metal as he fought to regain control. His heart hammered against his ribcage with such force he wondered if it might actually burst, while cold sweat erupted across his skin, as if his body was trying to evacuate his soul through his pores. Somehow, through sheer instinct and adrenaline, he managed to wrestle the vehicle back onto the road and guide it to the highway's shoulder. As the car shuddered to a stop, Kaylee continued her otherworldly monologue, the strange language pouring from her throat in an endless stream of incomprehensible syllables. Her head began to vibrate with an unnatural rhythm, as if something inside her skull was trying to escape through pure kinetic force. The sound she made was unlike anything in human experience, not quite speaking, not quite singing, but something that existed in the terrifying space between communication and possession. With trembling fingers, he fumbled for his phone and dialed emergency services, his voice cracking as he tried to explain the impossible to a dispatcher, who had probably never heard anything like it. "I think my girlfriend is having a seizure," he managed to stammer. Though every fiber of his being knew this was something far beyond medical science, S ability to comprehend or treat. As he waited for help to arrive, He remained frozen in his seat, torn between the desperate urge to help her and the primal instinct that warned him not to touch whatever she had become. Then, as abruptly as it had begun, the nightmare snapped to an end. Her head whipped toward him with unnatural speed, the strange language cutting off mid-syllable, as if someone had severed an invisible cord. Her eyes blinked once, twice, and suddenly returned to their normal hazel beauty butt. The expression they held was one of wild, animalistic terror, as if she had awakened to find herself in the presence of something monstrous. This is terrifying. The story you just read is called The Silence After Her Scream by an author. It was originally posted on a popular writing website. Let me know in the comments if you want to hear more stories like this one. Also, don't forget to subscribe if you haven't already. This platform is amazing because anyone, including you, can publish a story and get paid based on how many people read it. Now, back to the story. After a while, he managed to get himself to move. First, his hands, then his arms, and finally, the rest of him. He threw the car into park and cut the engine, the sudden quiet amplifying the pounding of his heart. What had just transpired? Where had she gone? And most importantly, why? He wrestled with these questions as he got out of the car, his legs stiff from the prolonged sitting. The forest loomed before him, a dark and forbidding presence that seemed to pulsate with a life of its own. The tall trees stood like crooked teeth against the bruised sky, and the undergrowth seemed to writhe as if concealing unseen movement. With a deep breath, he pushed those thoughts aside. There had to be a logical explanation for Kaylee's bizarre behavior. Perhaps she had had a panic attack, or maybe she was running away from some personal demons. Some trauma from her past that he wasn't aware of. He started walking into the forest, pushing aside the branches that reached out to grab him like gnarled fingers. The soft earth gave way beneath his feet, whispering secrets as old as time. The air grew cooler, dampening his skin and carrying with it the scent of decay, and something else, something indefinable, yet unsettlingly familiar. He pushed on, his determination to find Kaylee battling with a growing dread in his chest. Every rustle of leaves, every snap of a twig sent a jolt of fear through him. He called out her name, his voice cracking with tension. But the only reply was the mocking echo of his own terror. As the light began to fail and shadows stretched like grasping claws, he realized he was in too deep. The rational part of his mind screamed at him to turn back. But something, perhaps the fading hope of finding Kaylee, or maybe the primal urge to hunt, kept him moving forward. He felt their eyes on him, two sets of unwavering gazes boring into him from across the table. Their silence was a heavy blanket, stifling and suffocating. When the emergency responders arrived, their red and blue lights painting the forest in surreal, shifting colors, he found himself in the impossible position of explaining the unexplainable. The words tumbled from his mouth in a frantic cascade. The strange language, the rolling eyes, the supernatural speed of her escape into the wilderness. Even as he spoke, he could hear how insane it all sounded. How each detail seemed to stretch credibility beyond its breaking point. Yet the officers listened with professional patience, taking notes and nodding as if possessed girlfriends fleeing into forests was just another Tuesday night in their jurisdiction. He stumbled over the details, unsure how much to reveal, unsure how much they would believe. He described the unsettling chill in the air, the unnatural quietude of the woods, and the inexplicable feeling that something ancient and otherworldly was watching them from the shadows. He told them about the whispers he'd heard, the disembodied voices that seemed to echo from the trees themselves, murmuring secrets in a language not of this world. When he finished, the officers exchanged glances, their expressions unreadable. They assured him they would launch a search, though he could see in their eyes the same doubt he felt in his own heart. How do you search for someone who has seemingly vanished into thin air? How do you track a person who might not be entirely human? The paramedics examined him for shock and injury, their clinical approach a stark contrast to the supernatural chaos he had just experienced. Their mundane questions about his physical state felt almost absurd in the wake of what had transpired. Had she really vanished into the forest? Was it possible for someone to disappear without a trace, leaving behind not a whisper of their former existence? The days that followed were a blur of confusion and despair. Kaylee had simply ceased to exist as if she had been erased from reality itself with surgical precision. Her Instagram account vanished without a trace, leaving no digital footprint of their conversations or her carefully curated photos. When he attempted to call her number, he discovered it had been disconnected. Not blocked, not changed, but eliminated entirely from existence. Even when friends tried calling from different phones, they received the same mechanical message indicating the number was no longer in service. Most disturbing of all was his visit to the church where their story had begun. When he approached fellow congregants and described the mysterious young woman with dark curls and hazel eyes, he was met with blank stares and gentle confusion. No one remembered seeing her. Not once, not ever. It was as if she had never set foot in that sacred space. As if their entire courtship had been nothing more than an elaborate hallucination conjured by his grief-addled mind. The complete absence of any evidence of her existence created a psychological torture more acute than any physical pain. Our second tale emerges from the sun-baked expanses of Nevada, where the line between reality and mirage becomes dangerously thin. At the center of this story sits a mechanical relic, a 2012 Volvo that should have been retired years ago, but continues to wheeze along through sheer, stubborn determination. This automotive ghost refuses to die despite suffering from every ailment known to the mechanical world. Brakes that feel like stepping on wet sponges. An engine with the temperament of a wounded animal and electronics that function according to their own mysterious logic. Most critically and most ominously. The windshield wipers had surrendered completely to the desert's relentless assault, leaving them perpetually broken and useless. In Nevada State, so notoriously arid that elementary school teachers made careers out of emphasizing its drought-like conditions, this seemed like a manageable flaw. After all, what are the odds of encountering rain in one of America's driest landscapes? The family had adopted a philosophical approach to the car's declining health, waiting for it to finally expire, so they could justify the expensive replacement. But the universe has a perverse sense of humor, particularly when it comes to mechanical failures and geographical ironies. Our storyteller had just completed a rejuvenating solo journey to visit an old friend named Kelvin, one of those treasured connections that distance and time cannot erode. The reunion had been everything he had hoped, 4 nights filled with laughter, reminiscence, and the kind of deep conversation that only emerges between people who have shared formative experiences. The drive to reach his friend had been pure meditation, hours of solitary communion with the vast emptiness of the American Southwest. The journey home began with the same peaceful rhythm, mile after mile of desert highways stretching endlessly toward the horizon. But as he crossed the invisible line that marked Nevada's border, the sky began to darken with an ominous intensity that seemed to mock the state's reputation for perpetual sunshine. What started as a few innocent clouds quickly gathered into something far more full-scale thunderstorm, complete with lightning, that split the sky like cracks in reality itself, and rain that fell not in drops, but in sheets of liquid fury. This wasn't just precipitation. It was nature's declaration of war against every meteorological assumption the desert had ever fostered. He was trapped in a nightmare of his own making. A tomb of twisted metal and shattered glass in the middle of a raging desert. The rain, which had been falling in sheets, was now a torrential downpour. The wind, which had been howling like a banshee, was now a roaring tempest. And the darkness, which had been deepening since dusk, was now a suffocating blanket that blotted out all hope of rescue. He was alone, utterly and completely alone, in the vast emptiness of the Nevada desert. Surrounded by nothing but the wreckage of his car and the relentless onslaught of the elements. Hours ago, he had made a fateful decision to abandon his broken-down Volvo and seek shelter in the relative safety of the desert. Now, as the full force of the storm bore down upon him, he began to regret that decision. He should have stayed on the highway, he thought, even if it meant freezing to death in his car. At least there was a chance that someone might have found me there. But out here in the desert, there was no chance at all. There was only the cold, the rain, the wind, and the darkness. And as he huddled in the meager shelter of his car, he knew that these were not merely elements, they were his executioners. They were the agents of a sentence that had been passed upon him long ago without his knowledge. A sentence that now stood to be carried out in the most brutal and merciless manner imaginable. And so he waited, hour after hour, for the end to come. But the end did not come. And as the first faint glimmers of dawn began to pierce the darkness, he was still alive. And then, something remarkable happened. As the sun rose higher in the sky and the storm began to subside, he felt a surge of adrenaline course through his body. In that instant, he knew that he had survived the night, and a profound sense of gratitude and relief washed over him. The danger had passed, and he was still alive. But as the adrenaline began to fade, he was left weak and trembling, and the full extent of his ordeal began to crash over him. He had survived, but at what cost? He looked around him at the wreckage of his car and the desolate landscape that surrounded him, and he knew that he had been through something truly terrifying and alone.